Hello and welcome to another episode of the Spiritual Sisters podcast. This is Gabrielle Celeste, and I am so excited for this episode. And I think you are all going to love this because this is a topic that we really haven't gone into in depth. However, we have certainly alluded to it over the lifetime of our podcast. And so we think that you're going to get so much out of this and the specific topic. But today I'm so excited to welcome our guest, Heather Ivany, a expert on the clairs, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. So let's just get right to it. Hi, Heather. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Gabrielle. Pleasure to be here.
So excited. I feel like we planned this a while ago. And so to just have this finally come to pass, maybe 3 to 4 months later is super exciting. So can't wait for this one to drop. But we like to ask our guests a couple of questions at the beginning of every episode. And Nichole and I refer to it as a game of sorts. So I was curious as to what your big 3 in astrology are.
Oh, so that is Cancer, Pisces, and Sagittarius.
Okay, Cancer, Sun, Pisces, Moon, Sagittarius rising. So Nichole and I are actually Cancers as well, and we're born on the 22nd. Correct. So yeah, so you being a fellow Cancer, we're a little biased. Love it.
Nice.
Yeah, the double water sign energy, and then the fire. How does that balance out? Like, how does the fire come into play? Because I've observed double water and fire before in the big 3, but I feel like it really just exerts itself differently depending on which fire and water sign, of course. But I'm also a Cancer Sun, Pisces Moon. So I feel like I really understand that, but I'm curious how the Sagittarius comes into play.
Like, are you asking where I show up in my fiery energy?
Yeah, like how does your fiery energy balance out that double water?
Oh, I would say that the fire for me balances out because I have a capacity to be very strong in my masculine when I need to be, and I don't over emotionalize situations when I'm in them. That would probably be the biggest way that I can see it. For me, the water is where I see my emotions show up the most. So I grew up with 2 brothers. I used to do river guiding and forest firefighting. So I feel like the fire in me is what really allows me to have like the tenacity to be able to go into situations where I think if I was like water, I'd probably kind of puddle in front of people possibly and not be able to get things done. So it's kind of my motivator to get things done and to try hard things.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I love that. And you mentioned that you were a firefighter. We're totally getting into that when we get into the first couple of questions, just sharing your background. But before we go there, what is your human design makeup?
So emotional generator. And a 6-2.
Generator. Also a generator. I love that.
Yeah. Wow. We should hang out and date.
Right? We have a lot of, I've noticed that we do interview quite a bit of generators and Mani-gens too. So interesting. And a lot of podcast hosts that I've observed and I'm aware of happen to be Mani-gens. So there's just something to it.
Right. For me, I think it's if I'm not super refined in the human design, but I think that one of the qualities, correct me if I'm wrong, with the generator is that it loves to be able to bounce things off people and be able to like hear from people's responses what the need is and then respond to it. So I think that's a big quality that I like to have with like whenever I'm planning anything in my work is most of the things I'm planning, it's response to what I've heard people say or infer that this is what they're desiring. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, so you're an emotional generator. I'm a sacral generator. So it's usually like yes, no. If I don't have an answer, it's ask me later. But something that I definitely resonate with that you just spoke to is I survey the land. It's the most annoying fucking thing for some people, I'm sure, that are in my circle, that are my friends, that listen to my endless voice notes, where I'm trying to come to a decision. And something that I've noticed I really do is like, okay, like, what's your outlook on this to friend A? What's your outlook on this to friend B? And then friend C. And it's because I'm gathering information so that I can make a yes or no sacral decision. So really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. That's neat.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So then what are some podcasts, audiobooks, shows you're listening to or just consuming right now?
Well, I do like to check out with my books as well. So I can get right into sort of magical, fictional type books. Those are kind of when I've just had a long day and I just need to do something and I don't want to be on a screen anymore because I spend a lot of time on Zoom.
Yeah.
That's my go-to for kind of my kryptonite.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I'm kind of leaning into more like consuming and trying to gain more knowledge and wisdom, type of books I like to go to is I really love the Sophia Code
Yeah.
by Kaya Ray.
Mm-hmm.
I have a beautiful teacher, Ali Bogard, who just recently released a book called The Quiet Teachers. And then I like sort of layman terms translations of complex spiritual texts. So like the Bhagavad Gita, translated by, who is it? Stephen something, it's eluding me right now, but I like to take sort of like the Yoga Sutras or something like that and try and find a translation that just is spoken in such a clear and relatable way. That's usually kind of how I lean into.
Mm-hmm.
And then for podcasts, I don't listen to a whole bunch because when I get time to myself, I do like to be able to be in the silence. But when I do listen, I like Aubrey Marcus. I think he's got some really good podcasts I like to listen to. And then Deja Blue is another one that I like from time to time too.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah,
I'll have to
she's
listen.
great.
I've listened to Aubrey before, and I'm familiar with Ali, her name, although not her work.
Okay.
And then the Sophia Code, I know that one's like, it almost like finds you when you're ready, is my understanding, because it's so in depth. So, yeah.
And it's one of those ones that you can circle back to. So I remember when I first got it, I was like fully trying to, so it's, for anyone's listening that isn't familiar with it, it takes God in the form of the feminine archetype and of Sophia, and then has DNA key codes to be able to activate ascended masters inside of your sort of divine blueprint. So there's Kuan Yin, and there's White Buffalo Woman, and so there's several different ascended masters that she goes through, Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary. So when I first read it, I was like, I want to be all of them, and I just was trying to like absorb it all. And then now what I like to do is when I can feel the resonance of one of those particular ascended masters, I like to go back and kind of massage into it a little bit more intimately and deeply.
Yeah, my girlfriends, I have a couple that have read the book, and they've certainly said that they've felt that activation, and everything you just said, I'm just like, yeah, that totally hits. So I have yet to really dive into it just because I'm kind of like, am I ready for that upgrade at this time? Probably not. Let's hold on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I have two more questions, a part of this specific game. If you could have any client or just a potential sitter to read for, either living or dead, who would it be and why?
Ooh. I really find Eddie Vedder very interesting, the singer of Pearl Jam.
Musician. Yeah, musician. Right?
Yeah, there's something very captivating about him. But that's just what's coming to mind in the moment. I haven't really contemplated it a whole lot, but I think it would just be a trip to read his Akashic records and see where it takes us.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so now I'm curious as to what your answer is going to be for the next question, because usually when we get an artist or musician or creative, it's usually the same for the second question. But of course, no pressure. So if you could go to a concert for any musician, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Could be that. I would also, I like sort of inspirational singers. So the one that is on my bucket list is Mumford and Sons, just because I find a lot of their music to be just really inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
But I would go and see the Cliche Coldplay again. I really enjoyed their concert live. Super cliche, I know, but I find his music super inspiring as well. But I would love to see Eddie Vedder, not Pearl Jam, just an Eddie Vedder acoustic, like up close and personal campfire. That'd be like a super big bucket list for sure.
That's so cool. Okay, so Coldplay, I remember, and I promise, guys, we're going to move on. I was like 13, taking the train from San Diego back home, and for whatever the reason, the lady next to me, she was 22, she was pregnant, and she was playing Coldplay and she was playing Yellow. And for whatever the reason, I got so emotional on her behalf, and I had nothing to do with it. I was just sitting there, just listening to that by way of her being next to me. So anyways, that's my story with Coldplay, but I love them and Mumford and Sons as
I
well.
think
So,
that's why, like, now that you mention it, I think it's kind of one of those bands that I've grown up with. Like, you know, Yellow came out around the time that I got pregnant with my first kid, and it's just there's been very big milestones where there's some big releases by them, and yeah, so they've kind of been through these bigger years of mine. Yeah.
okay. Okay. I love that. Well, that's a great segue for just getting into your background and how you got
Mm.
into the work. I am really interested in your story, especially because, and we're definitely going to get there and I'll let you speak, but I know that you're self taught with respect to yoga and then getting into the intuition work. And I know you work deeply within the records. So, and I know we're focusing on clairs, but I would just love for you to kind of just take it away from here.
Yeah, so the self-taught was by default. So I used to work for a forest firefighting division that was a rappelling division. So I would be kind of the lone female on a base camp with sometimes 50 to 100 men, and we'd just be way up north in Alberta waiting for some smokes to happen. So we were
Wow.
a rappelling division that would be stationed in high fire zones throughout the summer. So we would travel around, but we would stay in base camps where there'd be firefighters that would be there all summer. So when we were in this positioning, we had to be within 100 feet of the helicopter for like 10 to 12 hours a day. So anything that you could do within 100 feet of the machine, you're welcome to do, but that's where you had to stay. And this is a little pre-cell phone, and like we were just figuring out how to like download movies so that we could watch some movies while we were hanging out. So like this wasn't the super technological age that we're in right now. So I had an interest in learning how to do yoga, and I had a girlfriend that I knew had just started. So she recommended a book. I think it was the Women's Book of Yoga and Health by Linda Sparrow. And so it was sequences that I would self-teach while I was hanging out with the machine all day. The boys got bored, so they asked if I would teach them how to do some yoga. I liked it so much that I signed up that fall to do a yoga teacher training. Had never been inside a yoga studio in my life. This is before they were on every like corner, like a 7-Eleven. This was like, I remember being in the training, and the teacher was like, some of you might, after teaching, 5 to 8 years, you might be invited to teach in a yoga studio, but it's not likely that that's going to happen. Like that's how like rare the studios were at that time. And it was like a real, it wasn't like people coming out of a 200 teacher training that were teaching at the studios. It was like teachers that had been teaching for quite some time. So that's how I got into yoga. And what I realized once I started the training was I didn't realize how many qualities of myself were actually being blended into being a yoga teacher. So this is how like naive I was. I didn't realize meditation was a part of yoga. I thought it was just a physical practice. So I had a meditation practice that got to be blended in. I had a teaching and coaching background, so I knew how to be in front of people. I knew how to demonstrate. I knew how to coach in that way. So that was comfortable for me. And then I grew up with a strong, like sort of Catholic upbringing that I then transformed into my own spiritual practice. And I didn't really realize how philosophical and how spiritual the practice of yoga was. So there's all these different modes of myself that got to kind of be blended into one vocation. So as soon as I entered in, it was almost like a homecoming for me. And that satiated me for a good 20 years. And then I got introduced to the Akashic records kind of blindly through COVID hit, the yoga studio shut down. I had some extra time. My husband was aviation, so he was also home. So we were just tag teaming, watching the kids. I got some extra time to be able to meditate and enjoy my own practice. And through that, I got a message in meditation to reach out to someone that I knew that I hadn't talked to in quite some time. And after the third night of meditating, I just reached out to her via email and I said, look, you keep coming up in meditation. I'm not sure what it's about, but I know that you're going to be able to know how to take it from here. And so she replied back and she said, well, why don't we do an Akashic reading together and see where it's going? Because that's what I do. And so I was like, okay, great. And so in that reading, it came through that I was kind of subconsciously working with the Akashic records. And she invited me to bring it into a more conscious level and to start working with it proactively. And so that's kind of how I leaned into that. And how I work with the clairs has just been taught to me by accessing the Akashic records. It's a way for me to help people to grow and expand their own intuition by having this very personalized way that I can work with it with people.
Totally want to know more about that. I'm curious before we go into the blending of the clairs and how you work with the records simultaneously with through both approaches, I would say. But like, how does the Akashic records appear to you? Because for me, it very much looks like a Hogwarts castle.
Well, because I'm not a strong clairvoyant, I don't get a lot of imagery when I'm in the Akashic records. So my strongest clairs are claircognizance, that's an inner knowing, and clairsentient, which is a visceral sensation or an emotional sensation that'll come up without a story connected to it, right?
Yeah.
So when I go into my own records, each time I open my records, there's a small sort of tingling on the crown of my head that I can't figure out how to make happen when I'm not opening up the Akashic records. So that's my confirmation that I'm in. It continues to expand and grow. And to be honest, it feels very familiar to the meditation current that I work with. The difference for me is that the Akashic records is instantaneous, whereas prior to working with the Akashic records, when I would meditate, it would usually take like 15 to 20 minutes to really massage my way in until I could feel myself getting into sort of a lighter, less dense pocket. Whereas the Akashic records, it's instant that I just feel the tingling come in, and then I'm in that current. I can be like in a very high stress state and still be able to access it. I don't have to have like climate controlled conditions to make it happen. But when I'm reading someone else's records, it's totally different every time because I'm in someone else's field. And so I'm experiencing the records from their viewpoint. So if someone is clairvoyant, I might see pictures and images when I open up the records. Oftentimes I'll get a feeling that I'm describing to them, and I'll get a place in my body where I feel their records opening from, and I'll share that with them. And then there's a significant sort of meaning as to why it's opening from the heart versus opening from the third eye or the back of the neck. And then even if one person opens from the heart and the next reading I do opens from the heart, even that can have variance within it as to like the meaning and the significance of it opening from the heart. So it's totally signature to the person each time I open someone's record.
So it's almost like the clairs are showing you the entry door to said specific record for whoever you're reading.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So fascinating. Okay, so can we run through the clairs that you work with predominantly? Because I know there's more than 7, but I feel like this is going to really be supportive for just those listeners out there. And I'm also very curious your interpretation and viewpoint on them, because I know they're different for everyone, but I primarily use the clairs within my intuitive readings. So I'm so curious as to how it shows up for you. So I'll let you.
Yeah, sure.
lead us in.
So for me, I know that so I work with 4 main clairs. I work with clairvoyant, claircognizance, clairsentient, and clairaudio. Yes, there's clairgustance. Yes, there's salient, the smell. And there's other ones on top of that. I think some of the other ones are kind of blended in what I would call clairsentient. I don't then subdivide clairsentient into other clairs. I just keep it one. Mm-hmm. And then for me, the taste and smell, what I've experienced is it's more of a way of acknowledging the present moment of like what we're in. But when I work with clients, it's not the strongest clair. So what I got downloaded was if I just concentrate on the 4, it's plenty, and people can find their direction, their compass from there. So claircognizance, and then how I kind of work with it too is there's a bit of an inner clair and an external clair. So for example, like a clairvoyant, if I'm doing like an energetic scan from someone, I'll do it from the crown of the head downwards, and I'll just go through those 4 clairs. I might pick up on someone being clairvoyant externally in the sense that when they walk into a room, they take in a lot of details that most people miss. They'll be able to, see the detail of the room and be able to tell if it has sort of like a feng shui or kind of a staccato kind of energy to it. They'll notice the presentation on a dinner plate. They'll notice what people are wearing. They just have a high attention to detail. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's like an external clairvoyant. So it's what you're seeing with eyes open using the physical eye that you can see far more than what the average person sees. Mm-hmm. Then when you close the eyes, there's the internal clairvoyant, which is the images that you see with eyes closed. And it's also the space where there's no picture. So the same how when there's no sound, like what we call the mic drop, and that pause in like a really good song where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the music kicks in again, that pause has so much communication that's taking place without any sound. It's the same when a clairvoyant can close their eyes and they can be in picture form, and then when the picture dissolves away and there's no picture before the next picture arises, that too is also the clair. Mm-hmm. And so clairvoyance can be seeing color. A lot of people will see color in like a wave-like form. Some people will, with eyes open, be able to catch like a color around someone's body, like an auric field, and be able to pick up on someone's vibrational frequency just by the color that they see surrounding them. And then some people see it as like a full-on motion picture movie, like they can see a whole video play out behind the mind screen with the eyes closed. So it's a very vast clair.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. And then if you transfer that into, do you want me to keep going and share the other? Okay. Please. So then if you transfer that into, say, clairsentient, the external clairsentient is the ability to pick up on other conscious imprints that are around you. So sometimes it's people. You go and stand beside someone, you feel neutral, they're anxious, and then all of a sudden you're feeling anxiousness within your own body. That's a form of like an external clairvoyant. But it's not just people. You can walk into nature and feel the resonance of nature and how that's different than the consciousness that you feel inside of a home. Mm-hmm. It can also be with animals, right? Like our horse whisperers and our dog whisperers, their ability to feel what the animal is sensing and feeling themselves. That's the external clairvoyant or clairsentient. Mm-hmm. And then how I would internalize it would be more when you're relating to self and having those same sensations come up. So you could be in a meditation practice and in this space of peace and calm, but then all of a sudden you get a very strong, overwhelming sense of lightness and like you're not alone and feeling like you're deeply held. All of that visceral sensation being produced without any external stimuli creating the sensation. You're not even in a story in your mind to create the sensation in the body. That's an internal clairsentient. And then it also, the same way that I just explained it, can show up for emotion. So there's a visceral, like tingling, swirling, hot, cold, hair standing up on the back of your neck. Those are all visceral sensations of a clairsentient. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the emotional sensation that you can also pick up and feel and sense with people. And then the claircognizance, so that's the inner knowing. Oftentimes, how I sort of work with this with an external claircognizance would be when someone says something to you, or you hear something on a podcast, or you hear something on the radio, and it's like an instant, like knowing that what was just said is the next steps you have to take, or a knowing that what was just said is true, even if you're hearing it for the first time. The internal claircognizance is when you get the download when someone says, hey, do you want to, pack up and go camping for the weekend? And you get an instant yes before the rational, logical mind can come in behind and start to tell you why or why not. That's a good idea to follow up on, right? Mm-hmm. So it's faster than thought, claircognizance. Mm-hmm. And then the clairaudio is similar to the clairvoyant. It's being able to hear externally. You're hearing what's not being said. Those people that can hear, tone in people's voice really well. So even if someone's like, no, I'm fine, and they'll catch that note that doesn't sound like they're fine. Usually these types of individuals are very musically sensitive. They listen to a lot of frequency. They enjoy a lot of music. When they travel on airplanes, they have to use noise canceling headphones because the sound is just too much. They have sensitive ears. And then internally, it's the ability to hear without the sound being produced externally. So the difference between like your thought voice and a clairaudio would be, for me, a thought voice is a little bit more meandering. It's a little bit more like it's a longer sentence. A clairaudio message, it's short, it's concise, it's precise, and it's usually authoritative. Whereas a thought voice can be a little bit more like, I wonder what that would be like, or or it's kind of a story that you're telling yourself a little bit more. But usually they sound the same, and that's why it's hard for people to distinguish between the two. The thought voice and the clair audio have the same tone. So it's the nuances between the two that we got to catch.
That, I think, for me, and maybe you can give maybe a little bit more detail about that specific difference between the claircognizance and clairaudience. Because for me, my clairsentience, voyance, and cognizance are online, but I've had distinct differentiators between the audience and the cognizance because I've literally like heard before. That's something that's not me. And so that has been such like it's been such a dance because I feel like that's the last one to come online, I would say.
Well, and they're meant to, dance is the great terminology, because the conversation that we're having right now is similar to having a conversation on the chakras. We can delineate them and separate them and put them into boxes and identify and explain them. Mm-hmm. But the reality is you can't influence the first chakra without influencing the fourth chakra. You can't be in claircognizance and not have a little bit of a voyance or an audio that's also playing out at the same time. So I would say what you're experiencing are two forms of a clair audio. One is like, some people hear the voice of God. Some people hear the Southern Louisiana accent that's not in their heritage that's coming through. Like some people hear a very distinct, different voice when they're experiencing their clair audio. And sometimes the clair audio is going to blend with your claircognizance, where it's a knowing, yes, I should do that. But then they also hear it confirmed with you're doing it, book it. Like it's a confirmed yes that they actually hear internally, not just a knowing that that's what they need to be doing.
So well said, and something for me to sit with. I think for me, I've also intentionally used one specific clair because I was training it, so I know the difference between them. Right. However, I think the feminine approach is very much to be in dance and flow with it. And so I think that's a nice opportunity to share also how one might develop the clairs. Do you have recommendations as to how to go about that? Maybe meditation, journaling, because I'm so curious as to what your suggestions are.
Yeah, those are great suggestions that you just gave. I think it's okay to also separate and dance with them individually, especially if you have kind of a bossy clair, or like one that's really well developed that it just hijacks. The same way the mind will hijack the intelligence of the body just because it's so used to being in control. It's gonna tell you how to feel rather than actually sensing and feeling how you're feeling, right? So the same is true with the clairs. If you have a really strong clairsentient and you want to give more real estate to your clairvoyant, then you kind of do want to hone in on it and sort of ask the clairsentient to be a bit more in the backseat and give space for the clairvoyant to introduce itself and share a little bit with you. But some tips that I work with that help is, one is you want to be expanding your awareness. So being, first of all, like checking in, like, am I open to being able to expand? So intuition for me is just the overarching terminology for the clairs that we're talking about. So if someone wants to expand their intuition, oftentimes there can be a known or a hidden kind of fear that's connected to it. And that will sometimes present as doubt, like just the non-believing, cynical self that wants to come in and protect so that we don't end up hurt. So the raw honesty of knowing, do I want to expand my intuition, or do I want to do it because someone's telling me I should? That's the first thing. And then if you know that you want to and you have some fears connected to it, that is also something that, an Akashic session can do to help to clear out any belief systems, any contracts, agreements that people have with themselves to not work with their clairs. And then we just kind of clear the palette, and then we start fresh, and we give some action steps on how to move forward to curate and work with them. So some ways is creating the awareness. Oh, I noticed that when I take in the detail of a space that I walk into, I can recall a lot of information driving home with my boyfriend afterwards, when he can only recall like 3 things that he remembers from that night that he saw, right? So recalling what it is that you see. If you get a download of a claircognizance of, okay, do you want to do the camping trip? Yeah, I totally do. And then give yourself permission, especially, you said part of your human design wants to sort of weigh the different options that are available to you. So you might want to make a note of like, okay, interesting. My first instinct was yes. I was a full yes. But then I'm going to give myself the space to do the pros and cons, the thing that my intellect wants to do so that it feels comfortable. But then I'm going to notice if after 2 or 3 days or an hour or two, whatever time you're giving yourself, if I come to the same conclusion that I originally had. Right? And just notice like, oh, like 70% of the time, even when I weigh the pros and cons, my instinctive answer is what I end up going with. That's very interesting to me. That's telling me that I can actually trust my instincts more than I give myself credit for. And then remind yourself that you're sovereign, so you get to have choice. So even though you're receiving what I'll call the sign or the message or the download, doesn't mean that you have to follow through in order to be in the good books with the frequencies that you're working with. So you can say no, but you can also say, thank you, please send more. So I appreciate, yeah, totally awesome. Probably sounds like a really wicked weekend. I do kind of want to catch up on some things I haven't caught up on, but that doesn't mean field, source, energy, frequencies, that I'm not interested in having you send me more messages moving forward. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Please send more.
Thank you, but not right now.
Exactly. Totally. Absolutely. So those are some ways that you can play with it. Increase the awareness, catch it, see if you can catch it, because oftentimes we're so busy we miss it. And then notice if after your processing of whatever it is that you align with it anyways, and then give gratitude and thanks and ask for more.
Okay, so if you are all watching on YouTube, my face is kind of just like tuned in, but also it's because my brain's working overtime, because as you're speaking, I'm digesting, but also thinking about the next question. And my point in saying this is that I was like, oh, like the sense of awareness, it helps me to process how I'm digesting intuitive information. And the part about that you said, just like the attention to detail, in my mind, I'm like, doesn't everyone do this? Isn't everyone this aware of their surroundings or what's going on? And so, would you say that everyone's intuitive?
Everyone has the capacity. Yes, everyone has clair abilities. Not everyone's connected to them. And because we live with ourselves so much, it's so easy to assume that what we have isn't significant because we've been doing it our whole life.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
and we're told not to compare ourselves.
Yeah. So someone that operates very much with, they see color in meditation. And if I'm doing a reading and I'm like, oh my God, you're clairvoyant, like your color comes through so much when you meditate. And they're like, well, doesn't everyone? So first of all, no, not everyone does. And secondly, they're like, yeah, but that's no big whoop. I mean, I've always been like that. So oftentimes, like the biggest, most authentic parts of ourselves are the parts that we make the smallest because we've always known them. And then the parts that, for some reason, the parts that we don't like oftentimes become the biggest. And that's where we spend the most time trying to fix, adjust, stretch, strengthen, whatever it is we want to be doing to it. Whereas the part of ourselves that's already vibrating in a very holistic nature, we diminish them because it's just like, yeah, no big whoop. It's always been that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So everyone has clairs. Oftentimes when I'm going through a reading with someone and identifying what their clairs are, they don't recognize that how they're doing life is actually through a clair. Like they're like, oh, I had no idea that me listening to music and getting so moved by music is a way that I'm connecting with clair. I just thought it was a hobby or a passion that I had.
Yeah.
Right? So oftentimes the way that we relate to the field or consciousness, God, source, whatever we call it, we don't know that we're relating to it because we've always been doing it.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's really easy to overlook natural gifts and talents because, just like you said, assume maybe everyone else has it as well. So you had mentioned something about a clearing within your Akashic Records readings. Is that you working with whoever your reading's respective clairs to move through so it can become a little bit more open for them to tune into that respective clair?
We can
for you to say more.
Yeah, like we can clear for any number of reasons. Someone might be booking a session because they want to explore a relationship that they have with someone. Now, I can't go into that other person's records because I don't have
permission,
consent, but we can look at the relationship between them and that individual and see what comes up. And then if we identify that, here's where you're energetically stuck, this is no longer serving you, we can clear it and get action steps as to how to stay connected to the new pattern we want to be having and not fall into the old pattern that created those tethers in the first place, right?
Yeah.
We can clear energies. Yeah, like we have a DNA, like we're talking a lot about our cosmic imprint, the Akashic is like the DNA blueprint of our cells. But then there's an actual ancestral DNA blueprint that has a tremendous amount of compounding experiences that show up in our body. No wonder people are sensitive to clair audio, because we have a societal history of institutionalizing people that hear voices. Yes. So you take that, not just people knowing that, but then people that have experienced that or had a relative that experienced that. There's no way I want to be connecting with my clair audio, because to me, it's a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I just recently read a meme, and I take memes with a grain of salt, but I'm like, this sounds accurate. Like, this sounds like something the patriarchy would have done. But it was something to the effect of like the Rockefellers, which were like one of the families that kind of established the patriarchy to look like what it looks like today in modern times. They intentionally changed the frequency of music to be a lower hertz. So we basically wouldn't be in our full power for that to be the outcome over time. And so it
happens even in dial tones on an old school phone. The dial, anyone who remembers who used to have an old school phone, the tone of the dial tone of a phone is intentionally set to a lower frequency to keep us small.
That is to keep us small. That's a beautiful way of saying it. And ever since I'm, into pop culture, and in one of our recent episodes, I had shared, I was just stupidly invested in Diddy Talk and, the music industry, and basically, which is ruled over by the planet Neptune, and Neptune's making big changes at this time. So that's why we're seeing kind of the fall of that and just all of this corruption come to light, which finally, but I can't listen to any musician associated with that. And I've like gone through such a clearing in my phone of musicians because I'm aware of the frequencies that they're essentially like using to manipulate, our energies for their benefit. And to that point, I think because, I do have a meditation practice, and I'm using myself as an example because I know this is going to resonate with our listeners. I almost got to a point in my frequency where I can't listen to certain music because it just doesn't vibe. Like, it's not a vibe. Literally how you hear people say that. So I'm just kind of have to move away from it because it doesn't make me feel good. And I can't put words to it, but I know energetically that's what's going on.
It happens in all areas. This is why the Great Awakening, I find it so fascinating. It's because it's like people are so frustrated with how asleep other people are, but there's a lot of layering that's gone in to put people to sleep. And we're just starting to move it out of conspiracy theory and into actual only recently. So I think it's been known for a very long time, the power of frequencies, the power of color therapy, the power of being in your own center and not being pulled to the distraction of the periphery. You want to disempower anyone, you convince them not to love themselves and see where it takes you. And so the pull back, the desire of people wanting to be in a space of being alone with themselves and being comfortable in that space, it's a challenging road for a lot of people, because there's a lot of stuff that's been over decades and centuries to keep us busy.
Yeah. Would you say that that's a cornerstone of your mission within your business through your readings, to support people to get to their ultimate potential?
Absolutely. But I take it even further in that the reading is just the get to know me aspect, where my deeper mission I love is to not have people look at me and be like, oh, that's so cool, I wish I could do that. It's like, no, if this is a desire that you have, it's totally available. So I teach people how to read the Akashic records. I teach people how to teach other people how to read the Akashic records. I teach people through yoga nidra and meditation how to be in your own skin and how to be your own best friend in that space. So there's a real heartbeat within me to have people expand and grow to their fullest capacity, because it's such an easy, simplified way to make humanity a better place.
I completely agree. And thank you for doing the work that you're doing. You had mentioned something. Nichole actually had a couple questions. She's here in spirit. And I was like, actually, I want to know this too. So you just spoke to Yoga Nidra. So please say more about that. And also, what is the difference between Yoga Nidra and Kundalini? Because those are a lot of terms that we get or we hear thrown around in this space quite often. And I'm just fascinated by it. Because one of my readers, she was like, Kundalini would be really good for your sacral, Gabby. And I was like, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. I didn't really lean into it at the time. I mean, I eventually got there to the sacral healing, but I do know yoga is a very powerful tool and it's a moving form of meditation. So I would love to hear your experience with it.
Well, I see them all as doorways to this. Like it's like if you think of consciousness as being a house, and then inside of the house there's many different rooms. And so one room is Yoga Nidra, takes you into consciousness. Another room is going to be meditation. Another one's yoga, but they all exist inside of the same house. So they're just different doorways, different gateways to get access to the same place. So even the Yoga Nidra state, you can go through the Yoga Nidra state and I can be in the same space of consciousness that I can get to through the Akashic records. I can go through the meditation current and feel like I'm in the same space that I get to when I go beyond the Yoga Nidra and into the space beyond. So first and foremost, there's just no hierarchy is what I want to say to that is, and for some people, it's eating really good food. And for other people, it's walking in nature. And some people it's chopping wood. And like, it's just whatever is the modality that gets you into the felt sense that you're connected to something beyond your finite time here on earth. That's the sense.
So this might be a silly question, but in order to achieve the state of Yoga Nidra, do you have to physically move in specific poses? Do you have to be like, how does one achieve that state?
Yoga Nidra is the complete opposite of what you think yoga is. It's the yoga of sleep. You're literally lying down and you're not moving for anywhere from 20 minutes to like an hour and a half. So you're guided by, so it's a science. It's so cool how science is, confirming spirituality. So Yoga Nidra predates science, and then science is actually using Yoga Nidra to be able to, when you hear of like Joe Dispenza reprogramming the subconscious mind, Yoga Nidra was doing this like thousands of years before the Joe Dispenza phase and the fanatics and all the rest of it. And Joe Dispenza is amazing. I love the guy.
Okay. I was like, oh.
No. I'm not anti Joe's. He's one of my favorite human beings.
Okay, cool.
So Yoga Nidra is, so it's a systematic guided relaxation. You put headphones in, you're lying down on your back. You can do it in a guided class, and you can self-guide yourself into the Nidra state. I prefer to do it externally and have a voice that I'm listening to when I'm doing it. But it'll how it works is, there in the subject of yoga, there's 5 layers to the body, and each of the layers, when they're softened, it's like they soften to such a state that it's like a curtain that opens and the next layer underneath can be accessed and revealed. So it very gently massages the physical layer of the body to such a degree that by the end of it, sometimes it's even hard to tell where the boundary of your skin ends and the air beside you begins. Like you get disorientated a bit with where your body is in space. And then it goes into the energetic layer of the body. And sometimes this will be through like a counting backwards breath work, or through, moving through the energetics of the chakras. So any part of the energetic layer of the body that gets massaged and relaxed, and then it opens up. And then you move into the mind emotion layer, and does this through opposites. And so the intention here is that when we're in our waking state, when we start to feel certain emotions, they'll trigger us into a protective state, so that we don't feel the fullness of the emotion, because the mind's going to hijack it and try and control what's happening. Whereas when you're in a Nidra state and the body is in such a deep state of relaxation, that's the premises of Yoga Nidra, is just a very, very deep body relaxation. The subconscious mind is on rest, and it's in its relaxation mode, so that the emotional sensation can come up. and be kind of catharticized through without the mind hijacking it and try and stop from what the body innately knows how to move emotion through. So you can have a strong trigger if you hear the word shame, but by practicing the same nidra over and over again, eventually shame isn't connected to a story that you have from something that you experienced in life, but shame gets to have its sensorial experience in your body without the meaning maker coming in and trying to put a story to it. It just gets to be shame and its total innocent nature of itself, right?
Yeah.
And then it goes into the visual intuitive layer through different rapid visualizations and long visualizations. And then you go into what's called the Anandamaya kosha. And that's the pocket of your individual self co-creating and playing and dancing with the universal self. And so it's usually a very quiet moment in the yoga nidra. So the state, like how you access it, is by going through the systematic process of deeply massaging the layers of the body until you reach the state where you're in the room in the house that you can get to through the Akashic records or astrology or human design work, whatever it is that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The way that you described those initial layers as you were, I don't know if are they built like on top of each other, or is there kind of like a hierarchy on which they?
It's like, think of it more from like the gross to the subtle.
Got it. Okay. So the way in which my brain interpreted that, it's almost kind of the process of like, and this might be off color, but achieving ecstasy.
Totally. So describe ecstasy for me, just so that we're on the same song sheet.
Just sheer pleasure, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so what's fascinating to a lot of people is that they don't think they're in the space when they get there, because we're so conditioned to it being something so external from ourselves that if it's not full of fireworks, unicorns, and rainbows, we somehow missed it. But the bliss state is a natural birthright of our essence of our being. So it should feel like a comfortable place when we arrive in it.
It's so, yeah. And I can think now of experiences that I've had when I've been in meditation where I'm doing like, deep subconscious work, but also a familiar that was intentional, but something that might be not intentional that I do on a daily basis, as does everyone else, is quite literally the process of falling asleep. And because I know that's a very familiar territory and similar one to actually subconscious reprogramming, I'm very mindful of the things I consume prior to sleep because I know my brain's taking it in. Totally. So yeah, that's such an interesting, like that entire process, the way that the brain works, the way that energy works, the subconscious reprogramming, our energetic fields, it's just truly mind-boggling.
It is. And that hypnagogic state, that little cusp that you can catch right before you fall, right as you're falling asleep, before you are asleep, and right where you open your eyes, but you aren't fully awake yet. Like where you're still like trying to figure out what day it is and where you are and all that space. If you think about that small moment in time just before you fall asleep and just when you wake up, what you're doing in Yoga Nidra is you're expanding that into a 40-minute, 60-minute process. And so, yes, a lot of people fall asleep because we are a very exhausted society. And sleep, you're still receiving it osmosisly. I don't know if that's a word. You're still receiving it in that way, even if you fall asleep. So those of you that are playing with Yoga Nidra and you're like, oh, I keep falling asleep, your body's probably incredibly exhausted. And it's doing exactly what is needed in order for you to get to a place where you can practice the Nidra and still be able to stay awake for it. So for some people, that takes months. And then where you want to catch it is seeing if you can determine the line between, am I falling asleep because I'm exhausted? Or am I noticing that I always fall asleep during that Manamaya kosha layer, that layer of opposites? And for some people, it's actually a form of resistance to what's happening in the Nidra by the body putting you to sleep so that you don't have to deal with it. It's very fascinating.
I feel like we need an entire episode just on that so we can understand the mechanics behind this topic.
Well, I don't totally know the science, so I'm glad it's a short interview because I wouldn't be able to take you there.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate, just everything you've shared today. And we did talk right before recording, and you mentioned you'd be so kind as to provide our listeners with a discount code as to booking a session with you. But please let us know like where everyone can find you and what your offerings are, and tell us all the things.
Sure. Thanks for giving me space to do that. Yes, I'll share with you a 25% coupon for anyone that wants to book an Akashic session with me. Mm-hmm. Your listeners are welcome to use that. And then if you want to just learn a little bit more about me, my website's just my name. So it's Heather Ivany, Ivany .ca. Or no, .com, sorry. It's heatherivany.com. Mm-hmm. And so then I just have a wide range of offerings. If I have some online offerings for people that just want to figure out how to be more connected to their center. Mm-hmm. I obviously teach the Akashic Record training. I love to be in intimate layering effects through retreat. So when we can just pull out of the matrix and just go into deep experiential processes. And that's a mix of yoga and yoga nidra and meditation and dancing and playing on the beach and exploring nature, all the things that just bring us back into our home base. And it goes on and on. Yeah, there's lots to check out and explore there just by checking my website.
Love it. Yes. Listeners, spiritual Barbies, spiritual Kens, go out and check out Heather. I'm sure you won't regret it. And we will link all of that in the show notes, but we like to close out our episode with a card pull. So I know you have a card deck. Which one are you pulling from today? And thank you for
this is a fun one. I did with an Australian teacher, Vanessa Ovens. Vanessa Barcello Ovens. I did a goddess series with her for 6 months, and she recommended this oracle deck. So it's actually from Australia. It's Starlight Frequencies. But the reason why I like it is because I find that this was actually created from the Akashic Records. So all of the cards are just in alignment with where I go with people when I'm working with them. So, do you want me to pick, or do you want to pick by just telling me when to stop?
No, you go for it.
Okay. I'm going to go here. All right, so this one's downloads. Open your senses to receive, activate. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. To receive activations, period. Activations are inbound. Let white light flow through you to open up your channel further. And so each card has like a number. I'm not super into numerology, but this one's 28 for anyone listening that knows the significance of 28. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I love how there's just no real picture. They're short, they're concise, and they're usually on point. So we talked a lot about our downloads today, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm like, that kind of just called us all out. So nice. I love it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And I know our listeners are going to love this episode. And there's just so many gems in there. And I feel like I have to go back and reflect myself of just like applying different ways and approaches in which the clairs are trying to provide me with information too. And I know that's going to be supportive in my readings. So Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Lovely to meet you and hang out with you today.
Thanks again. Until next time, everyone. Bye.